Welcome to Event Experience by Bizzabo, the podcast where we bring the best and brightest event experience leaders together to share stories, tips, and lessons learned from creating some of the world's biggest events. I'm Rachel Moore, your podcast host. In this continuation from Bizzabo's 2025 Event Benchmarks webinar, we welcome back Katie McIntyre, Director of Strategy and Event Technology at Opus, to our microphones to discuss expectations by event planners for this year in the industry. Virtual to in-person events, micro events impact on networking, and registration conversion rates are on the docket to help you bench press an all-new year in event experience. Our guest's career journey has taken her through exciting event roles at AWS and Informatica, leading her to her current gig as Director of Strategy and Event Technology at Opus. She is a creative problem solver, I love those people, who thrives on using tech to turn big ideas into reality. She is all about crafting events with purpose, ones that aren't just about networking, but about creating authentic connections that today's audiences, like yourselves, dear audience, genuinely care about. I'm really happy to welcome Katie McIntyre from Opus. Katie, welcome to Event Experience.
Thank you, Rachel. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, I thank you. I'm excited. And for anyone who has listened to the podcast or dials into any of Bizzabo's stuff, this is not the first time we're talking. You and I were across screens from each other along with a couple of panelists at a recent Bizzabo webinar. Let me carry on into the get to know you questions. So I am going to ask the first question. I did ask you this in the webinar, but again, if anyone missed it, if you're having a very long event day where you know you're going to be on your feet all day long, what are your go-to event day shoes?
I have the saddest answer possible for this. I only own one pair of shoes. They're Mark Nolan men's shoes. I accidentally ordered them a size too big, so they have a very cushy insole on the inside. Everybody always thinks that they're like a teenage boy's shoes when they see them laying on the floor. But they're fabulous and comfortable. And I buy one pair of shoes and wear them until they fall into absolute rags.
Well, it's like you said, though, if it's a wash, rinse, repeat that works, then keep doing it. So,
but I have an 8-year-old son, and his two favorite things in the entire world are entropy and consumerism. So he's always wanting some kind of like obsolete tech gadget. Right now, it's an iDog that you can only get on eBay for hundreds of dollars. And he's figured out, he asked for them for Christmas. I want an X. And I'm like, no, I'm sorry, they don't make those anymore. They're discontinued. And he's like, is that a problem for Santa? So we've actually had to delve into like how Santa has to abide by licensing rules. And he can't, if it's a generic thing, he can make you a doll, but he can't make you an X brand doll because of licensing. And so that's where all my money goes.
Oh my gosh, that is amazing. I like your son, and it sounds like you have your hands full there. Like my son's the same. Like I swear that kid, we keep thinking, I'm like, he's not going to go into, he was thinking about going to be a lawyer because I'm like, that guy will find the loophole, and he would just debate with us. And I'm like, oh God, we're in so much trouble. So I feel the pain a bit. Is there anything that you're listening to, watching, or reading these days that you can't put down?
So I just finished watching the second season of Shrinking. I am such a massive, this is my pretentious speech that I give all of the time. Find a showrunner that you love and follow them everywhere. So Bill Lawrence, everything Bill Lawrence touches is gold to me. I watched, he just recently had Bad Monkey, which I enjoyed. Shrinking, he did Ted Lasso, Cougar Town, which is criminally underrated if you've never watched Cougar Town. So yeah, season 2 of Shrinking, amazing. Enjoyed it.
I have heard that as well. And I did not realize, what was the other one that you said he did? He did Shrinking, he did Cougar Town, and the other one. Oh, Ted Lasso.
Bad Monkeys, Ted Lasso, Scrubs.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Yeah. And you're so right too. Cause I found that as well. And I am someone who nerds out that kind of stuff at entertainment, and I will follow certain directors, writers, etc. But showrunners, I'm going to go check because I bet a lot of my favorite shows have
this is going to be the part where you Google and it's like, actually, Bill Lawrence was not the showrunner on some of them. So cut my pretension some slack.
Well, it's this is immortalized already, so it'll always be in this podcast. But at least you did give us some great things to go watch. And now I've actually been contemplating watching Ted Lasso again, so I might have to go do that. But I will absolutely go check out those other shows, and Shrinking is certainly on my list. Is there a particular social post, a piece of media, or even a hot take about events that you found interesting lately?
I cannot comment on anything that has been happening on social media in the last several months.
Okay.
I have been doing my absolute best not to be on social media, with the exception of LinkedIn, which is like,
That
go to LinkedIn.
that's work related, yes.
But I have been doing my best to stay away from social media, and I am very much a lurker, not a poster.
Mm.
So if I do not have the courage to post on social media to friends and family that I know intimately, I am certainly not going to give my hot take. Professional one.
Well, one could say, Katie, that what you just said was a hot take, that you are not haven't been on social media for several months, which might sound impossible, but can actually be quite refreshing. So I'm glad that you shared that perspective with our audience. It's always it's great to unplug, and particularly when you feel like sometimes you can't, you absolutely should. So some people might be a little more familiar with you, but since I just gave a super brief intro of you, I would like to toss it back to you. And Katie, tell us a little bit more about you, about your role at Opus, and kind of what your world is like there.
Yeah, so I've been with Opus for roughly 13 years. I started off in the technology department doing front end web development for our proprietary platform. And about 2021, so mid pandemic, got the opportunity to check out the brand side and see what that was like. Was a wonderful experience with a lot of really amazing people. Gave me a lot of perspective, but I missed my Opus family, so I came back. But I wanted the opportunity to do something a little bit different. At the time, I thought a little bit more creative. So I moved over into strategy and then swiftly found that I missed the creativity of event technology. So I was lucky enough that Opus really cares about finding the right fit, the right role for their people. And so they let me do both. They let me have the green grass on both sides of the fence. And so now I sit 50-50 on each of those teams and sort of work to advocate for the strategic importance of event technology.
That's really cool. I first want to point out too. I love that you mentioned that you did front end development first. So you're kind of a nerd that you came in on all that. I'm always surprised, but then when I think more about it, it's like, oh, it kind of makes sense when people who are in more of those technological careers, but they start tapping into the creative vein and they move into those kind of roles. So I think it's fascinating that that's where you started, but you evolved in this direction.
Yeah, I think that's one of the big misconceptions about technology is that it's very precise and very mathematical. And in some ways it is. I mean, if you leave off that semicolon, your code is going to crash spectacularly. But in a lot of other ways, it's very creative and very individual. It's like I tell people all the time, 1 + 1 = 2. Yes, that's true. But 2 times 1 also equals 2, and 4 minus 2, and a million different avenues to arrive at the same endpoint. And there's no two developers who code in exactly the same way.
That's a cool way to think about it. And frankly, translating that over into event planners, everybody's going to have their own unique approach to whatever experience they're designing, how they're looking at things, their strategy. So I think that's super fascinating too. But yeah, I'm sure a lot of our audience can relate to that. A lot of them might have come from that kind of background, be like, hey, Katie's my people. I'm excited to have her on. Now, I mentioned that you were a panelist on a recent Bizzabo webinar, and we tackled in that webinar the benchmarks in the industry as we are, I think it's safe to say, well within 2025 now. I'm really excited to have this opportunity to expand farther into the short segments we had on there. Obviously, in a webinar, we have very short blips. We've got several people on the panel, and we got to hit everybody. But I have you all to myself right here in this podcast episode, so it's great. I wanted to kick off with this question. And for the audience, you're going to hear us talk a bit about some stats that got discovered by Bizzabo surveying 1,500 event planners and or attendees. And so there were a lot of findings. Again, talked about them in the webinar, but we're going to dig a little deeper into them here. We have a little more time to do that. So, Katie, if you recall, one of the benchmarks we discovered, 57% of organizers said that attendance at their events has grown in the past year, which, yay, that's great news. Better to have that a little bit higher number on the top of the scale than lower. But I want to get your reaction to that and just what do you think about that stat? Do you agree, disagree? Tell us.
Well, I share your yay.
Yay.
And I hope that trend continues and grows over the coming year. It's not surprising ultimately. And I think that there's a couple of reasons for that. So we're seeing this renewed hunger for in-person experiences. I know that that is such a cliche. It's a quote that has resonated across the industry for the past year or so, but we really are. And a lot of it comes down to travel budgets are expanding once again. People are getting comfortable going back out into the world again. And there's this hunger for face to face. There's a statistic pre-pandemic, networking really was a priority to roughly 20% of attendees. It was something that was a nice to have, but it wasn't considered essential.
Mhm.
Content was, as the saying went, king. We're not finding that at all these days. More recent surveys have put networking at around 88% of attendees citing it as the single most important contributing factor to their attending an event in person.
Wow.
And the pandemic proved that we can take in content online. So if we're going to travel, if we're going to, put our lives on hold, get on a plane, get in a car, spend the money, we really want to see people and we really want to connect with them in a meaningful way. And I think that this return to in-person event attendance is just a reflection of that.
Katie, that is a fascinating point. And I love that you call that out because obviously, yes, we all learned and in large part, thanks to event planners who pivoted so quickly during COVID to say, okay, yeah, we can do things virtually and now you have to. And they proved that, yes, we can make this content happen digitally, virtually, that people can still ingest it. Well, like you said, we all learned and we're like, okay, well, I know I can do that virtually. The thing that I can't do as well is network with people. I've heard a ton of people say that too. And obviously, I think even in the benchmarking report, we saw that, and which we'll get into in a little bit. But we saw that there's just a lot to that in-person experience that it's just not it can't quite hit the same way as on virtual as it would as in person. Are you seeing an Opus too? I mean, as far as like your the events that you've designed that you all saw, like, hey, yeah, we're seeing that the in-person appetite for in-person is definitely still high, or is it growing, in fact?
Absolutely. And a lot of our clients are shifting from this idea of one single large event that everyone travels to micro events or hyper local events that take
Mhm.
place within their communities. And we're seeing a lot of organic growth that way too. It's no longer quite such a commitment that brands are asking from their attendees,
Yeah.
which makes it easier for people to kind of dip in and dip out as their schedule allows.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a great point too, and something I think we've all been seeing that, and even, like, on this podcast, a lot of people I talk to, a lot of our guests have been saying micro, and when we're talking micro, we're talking, like, sometimes it's super micro, like, it might be 6 to 10 people that you invite to something, might be a little bit larger. It doesn't have to be like, "Oh, this is a big to-do," like, it can literally just be a very intimate dinner or coffee and things like that, but those are certainly digging in there. Let's talk a little bit about the thing I think it's a pain point all of us are feeling. I mean, even, and I'll just throw this up, I'll offer an anecdote. Last summer, I think I registered for a conference literally 6 days before it happened, and it was in Washington, D.C., and that is not where I live. I live in Denver. And so I decided to go. I did pay a bit of a premium for my registration fee as a result, but it was just one of those things. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna do this. So I'm the poster child, everybody, for what I'm about to describe. And I apologize to all the event planners who are like, oh, you people. One of the things that we found, again, from the Bizzabo benchmark survey, 59% of organizers said that compared to previous years, last minute registration for in person conferences, summits, and conventions is increasing. It can drive us absolutely bonkers. I'm sure everybody listening and watching can feel the pain. I would love to hear from you, Katie. How are y'all managing that trend where everybody's like, yep, I'll let you know, like literally 11th hour that I'm going to be there?
I mean, it is absolutely a trend. Our registration team keeps statistics for us to reference on our registration surge periods, and we're still seeing something like 30% of attendees at T minus 3 weeks.
Wow.
It's beyond. But there's a couple of things that we can do to kind of move the needle on that. So the first is de-incentivize procrastination to make it impossible to procrastinate. So we see a lot of early bird. Early bird is the standard in registration. Problem with early bird is that it is a set period of time in which I know I can procrastinate and still get the benefit. So if your early bird period ends in March and it is currently February, I am still not thinking about it until March. And then the likelihood that you've continued to have my attention through March for me to remember to register during the early bird period is very low. So it's not quite the incentive that it has been in past years. And what we like to recommend instead is a first comers pass. So a limited number of passes, let's say first 500 who register get this discount. And you can stack that on top of your early bird. But because it does not have a set duration, it makes it impossible for you to procrastinate if that is an incentive that actually works for you. The other thing is to understand with a lot of attendees, let's face it, it's not their money.
Right.
So the early bird pricing period for a corporate attendee, depending on who their manager is, obviously, depending on what their departmental budget says, but it might not be the personal incentive that we need it to be in order to get that individual to register at that time. So we like to pair that with sort of an early bird, early access as well, especially for conferences where there is still that high demand for content.
Yeah.
Saying, if you register during this early bird period, not only do you get the discounted pricing that makes your boss happy, but you will actually get access to the session catalog or the agenda builder a week early, which means that you get to snap up all those sessions that are traditionally gone by the time you manage to log in. So giving them some sort of personal motivation to act quickly, paired with that sort of corporate overarching managerial incentive, we find to be particularly effective.
I love that idea. Shoot. I mean, anybody who's ever, I think we're all used to sometimes, well, especially nowadays, you go to movies, go to concerts, stuff like that. If it's not general admission, you want to get you the best seats. You need to be there right in the front of the line. Hello, Taylor Swift concert that everybody was going to, apparently. But it just really resonates. That lines up a lot with things that we're seeing just in commercial environment where these are the things that you want to get to. We'll be right back with more event experience after the break. From backstage to the spotlight, the Event Experience podcast by Bizzabo gives you a front row seat to the event industry's most captivating stories. Want to get more out of each episode? Visit bizzabo.com/podcast. That's bizzabo.com/podcast for show notes, transcripts, links, and resources mentioned in each episode, and more. The Event Experience podcast by Bizzabo, where events become unforgettable experiences. We're back with Katie McIntyre to decide if registration to attendance rates this year are super great or super lame. I like to, you're bringing that up as well, because I think we all know that, like, particularly if someone's like, hey, my company or my brand is paying for me to go to this, they have to contend with the internal approval process. And like, oh, well, unless their boss or their department has like an allocated, yep, you get this much money, like from, each year, they're like, we just know you have this and now go decide how you want to spend it. But what's probably happening is most likely people are like, no, I don't have that, but I have to go make a pitch to someone internal and say, well, I want to go to this. Here's how much it costs. And here's they have to build around. And if you're a smart event planner, you're trying to help them with that. Like, let's give you materials that can demonstrate to your decider that it's good for you to come to this. I like that give us two great ideas there. Baking in hey, here's like a very set number, a minimum number, an arbitrary number of people that they will get. If they sign up first, they're going to get something nobody else is going to get no matter what. And then making sure that maybe there is that little bit of like, and by the way, exclusivity about the content that they're going to get, if they sign up at a certain time. So super smart. I mean, it all leads back to that FOMO. Nobody wants to miss out on the deal. And again, maybe it'll help make the case say, if we sign up by this time, I get this, and that increases the ROI. Ta-da. So really good. It's good. There's little sales involved with this, feels like, right? Where you've got to help people like pitch with this.
There always is. And that's, it's a difficult thing for planners. When you're first rolling out your registration, it is very unlikely that you have your content fully baked. So when you're making those justification letters for your attendees, it's hard to lead with specifics. We always see the justification letters that are like, let me go, this event will be great. Cross my heart, hope, there's nothing quantifiable. Yeah. And a lot of times when we're going to our managers, we have to take back some sort of quantifiable data that we can use to make our case. So things like that, and things like being able to look at, let's say, your submissions. So you can't necessarily say, we're going to have this specific number of sessions. But
Right.
you can lean on historical data and you can say, in 2024, X% of sessions were around my industry or around my specific niche in my business, my role or my job title. So leaning on those historicals and then looking again at what you've got submitted, what's in your pending queue to be able to sort of glean insights that people can take back can also help people make that internal pitch.
Really smart. Yeah, I think we've talked about that too. Anytime you've got the past data, historical data, but also those reviews that if people have said in any way, like here's the kind of role I'm in, and here's how this attending this helped me, then that it's like a case study. People can like identify with that and use that and go run with it. But really great knowledge there and some ideas. Let me ask you about this next stat regarding registration conversion. So 37% of organizers, according to Bizzabo's benchmark survey, achieve a 20 to 40% registration to attendance rate. That seems pretty decent, but I'd like to hear from you. Like, is that to you, is that like, hey, that's a great stat, or is that kind of like, nothing really changed, or where do you fall on that?
I would need to unpack this statistic because that seems staggeringly low to me. So I'd like to know if that includes in-person events only or hybrid or virtual as well. I mean, I'll say in the virtual sphere, that's great. You got 20 to
Right.
40% of your people to attend your webinar. Fantastic. You are doing something right. In person, I think it comes down to the old quote that I trot out all the time.
Mm.
What we gain cheaply, we esteem lightly. If
Ooh,
you are uh comping attendance for everyone at your event, you're telling them that your content is not worth much, that
right.
your event is not worth paying for. And I wouldn't be terribly surprised if they treat it accordingly. A lot of our events are fee paid events, and we do not see a high number of attrition.
Right. I would imagine not. Yeah. I mean, and it, gets back to that last minute thing. Like it's probably a lot easier to say, oh, well, I just registered with an email. And, if it's a virtual event, you're like, well, now something came up, or I don't feel like doing that, or, oh, I can just get it on demand later, especially if you offer that, which, there's some advantages to that. You could still like get that content. You've got the person's email, which, as we all know, is currency, in the business we're in. But yeah, you're talking like an in-person event, especially if you're doing, like you said, if it's comped, it's free. There's no stake that person has in like, well, I get to go or not go, and it doesn't make a big difference to me. Whereas as it makes a big difference to the event planner. But yeah, I would think it sounds like if you're, like you said, unpacking this, which any of you can do. I know this is me getting my little Bizzabo guess what hat on, but this is a free download for you to get a benchmark survey, which will dig more into stats like this, saying, well, here's where this is coming from and what kind of events we're talking about. But yeah, if you've got skin in the game, if you've got money down, then you're far more likely to go and not have to miss that event. But good information on that stat.
I will say that there are things you can do to incentivize people to attend
Yeah.
your virtual event and also your in-person event. A lot of it has to do with how you're planning sort of the life cycle of your engagement. If you're only planning for that in-person, butts and seats moment, or if you're
Yeah.
planning holistically the pre, during, and the post. I heard a panelist on another event recently give the suggestion that you should never offer on-demand access unless people have checked in and watched X% of it
Ooh,
live. So
interesting.
it's not you have to watch all of it. It's
Yeah.
you have to watch, it's a 30-minute presentation. You have to log in and be there for 3 minutes. That's it. 3 minutes out of your day, after which we will send you the link to unlock the on demand. And what this person found is that by doing that, people got in for the 3 minutes, got a little bit hooked on it, watched,
Yeah.
5 to 7 because genuinely they were busy, but then had something that seed planted in their mind that made them want to follow up and watch
Yeah.
the on demand that kept it present and top of mind. It's the same thing for your in-person attendees who can't come. If they have some sort of alternative,
Mhm.
we all know that life is very, very busy and chaotic these days. And, people who have invested the time to register for your in-person event or potentially made travel arrangements, they want to go or they did at
Yeah.
some point. So planning in advance for avenues to engage those people virtually or through some sort of drip content that you have that's specific for them.
Yeah.
As you said, you've already got their information, sending them daily recaps of, this is the best of what you missed. If you can't afford to do a virtual component or to record all of your sessions, having highlights, having the slides available for people to download who potentially
Yeah.
couldn't go is another great way to keep them engaged with your brand and your event, despite the fact that they couldn't be there in person.
I think that's such a great point. And gosh, I mean, you really are. I think about video marketing. If you think about your average like YouTube that people watch, you need to like get into the guts of the content within 2 to 4 seconds, or people bounce. And same thing here, where you're like, okay, but if I can keep them that long, and even if they do, if they're like, oh, I'm just going to stay here, but I'll bounce right after that. But I like that you have that little teaser there, where it's like, if you're here this long, then you get the content. We're not just automatically going to give it to you because you registered. And a lot of people listening might think, I'm a little scared, but why don't you just test it? You can always test it and see. Even you could test that with a single event with like half your audience, or even a portion of your audience. Say like maybe you just send that portion saying, okay, you only get the on-demand content or something if you're here for a few minutes, and see what happens, and test it that way. But I love, that's a great idea. And again, that it's always going to lead to other people's ideas too. Like, ooh, what are some other ways I can keep that retention and convert that person, and make sure they stick around for the whole thing. So really great insights. Thank you for those. So in the webinar about benchmarks, we did talk during one segment about experiential and making sure that those are being incorporated into events. I would love if you could expand a bit more on that, and even provide an example of how you and Opus have incorporated experiential into your events, since that seems to be what people are hankering for.
Well, we work with a lot of large technology clients. And the challenge for technology clients often is that the things their products do can feel like an abstract.
Mm.
So, for example, let's say, and this is not an actual example, but let's say that you're working on an event that's about cybersecurity. There is this idea of defense against a threat. It's a
Yeah.
very nebulous thing until it happens to you. And so it's difficult to get people motivated and invested in the story when the story is faceless antagonist against, uh, so finding ways to incorporate experiential that are narrative, that are immersive, that really bring these abstractions to life
Yeah.
can be a very helpful way for people to not only engage with your content, but to remember your content.
Yeah.
Novelty is the number one thing tied to memory formation. So when we see the same old content that we're used to, the same old talk tracks, the same old, thought leadership presented in a way that's slightly different, it flags our brains to pay attention, even though that's why remakes, right?
Yeah.
We've seen the original. Why do we go to the new one?
Right.
Because there are things inside of it that are just slightly different enough to stand out and to pique our curiosity.
Yeah, exactly. I thought about some of those things too. And those are always, I'll just be honest, when I've gone to trade shows, I think we're all normal, used to seeing a normal booth and how it's set up, and you've got a little seating area, and you've got the little stand up, tabletops, and that people can talk at, and things like that, where, okay, exchange of ideas and information here, and let me scan your badge. But if you can construct something too, and you're right, when it's something that's a little bit more nebulous or a little conceptual, and harder to kind of experience, if you can put someone saying, okay, well, let me help you tap into that empathy. How does someone who needs this feel if they're in an instance where either they really need it, or they already have it and they're feeling that satisfaction, and trying to tap into that side of it is a very smart idea. And again, you can do it. You've got, especially if you've got that physical space, be different, and offer people something different, because at least people will be talking about it, and then they're going to learn more about that anyway. But I think you're right. I think there's ways, and our event planners, everybody out there is so creative. Like we talked about, just think about those ways where you're like, okay, what can I do that's going to maybe shake things up a little bit, and get people, like you said, to come outside of their normal myopia, if you will, and think about what is the thing that I didn't know I needed from this particular brand or vendor. So really great idea there.
We've known about the power of customer stories, customer
Mm.
success stories for ever so long. And that's all that experiential really is. It's taking other people's experiences, or taking, imaginary perspectives and making them physical, making them real, making them something that people can interact with. A lot of it comes down to being less transactional. we all have this reluctance to engage at events when something feels mercenary or transactional or inauthentic. And taking it outside of, as you were talking about, that booth experience, that very salesy, pitchy, I'm here with a purpose sort of format, makes it feel a little bit more accessible, a little bit less mercenary. And I think people really resonate with being able to safely experience brand content in a way that doesn't feel like they're being taken advantage of, or they're being pitched to, or they're going to be asked to make a commitment immediately. You know, I'm one of those people that walks into a store and I want to look, I want to browse before the salesperson comes up and starts asking me if I need anything. And it's very much like that in the world of events. People want to have an organic and holistic impression of your brand before they're approached in a way that feels transactional.
My final, easiest question of all, where can our listeners find and follow you online?
You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm the Katie McIntyre at Opus. I'm one of about 63 Katies. So McIntyre, McIntyre, and connect with me there if you want me to silently lurk you. Since, as I stated, that is what I do.
We'll skill up with Katie's advice on the best approach to ensure positive attendee sentiment.
Curiosity is paramount. There are so many events that I see being done that are done because it is people's entire jobs to do. And their legacy, and many of them are quite successful. I mean, I'm not knocking the lather, rinse, and repeat when it works. But you have to understand why you're having an event and who you're having it for. And you have to make sure that the brand goals and the attendee goals have moments of overlap where both are getting what they need. Those are the moments that really resonate at events to me, are those where the brand purpose is clear. I know why they're having an event. Therefore, I know what's expected of me as an attendee at this event. And they know why I came, and thus they're ready and willing to meet those needs.
Yeah.
And I think it's a perpetual refresh. If you want to have an event that stays current, stays relevant, you have to be curious about why people are coming and what your brand can offer them, and provide opportunities for a true engagement. We talk about events as engagements all the time, but at a surface level. It has to be a true conversation that is not unilateral. We have to provide our attendees with opportunities to tell us what they need and then find ways to meet those needs.
Thanks again to Katie McIntyre for joining us on Event Experience, and thank you for listening. If you're enjoying the show, we'd love to hear it. Connect with us on social and subscribe, rate, and review us wherever you're listening. Also, don't forget to share the show with your colleagues and friends. You can find transcripts of each episode and key takeaways on bizzabo.com/podcast. On behalf of the team, thank you. We'll gather again soon for a new episode of Event Experience.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.